whatever you've been thinking about for the past X amount of days, months, years that got you to the point of getting up and going to your manager's office that you're about to knock on, all those things are possible and are a better alternative than walking past that door and sitting down at your desk again. 100%. That's what I would say.
That is Kaan Erel this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey, my friend. How you doing? How's your summer going? Are you keeping up with your training? Have you been sticking to that diet? Are you still working on those goals you told yourself that you were going to work on? My hope is that you are somehow, some way, doing it for yourself, and that is how you found your way to this podcast. My name is Ian, and I am the host here on the Do It For Yourself podcast, and I am very excited that you found your way to this episode to spend some time. Before I get into my guest, I would just like to ask for a quick favor. If you could, please take a minute while you're listening to this episode. If you are not driving a car, jump on your phone and leave a review on the Apple Podcast app. That will help me out big time, and I would really, really appreciate it. This week, my guest is Kaan Erel. And Kaan is a basketball fanatic. He absolutely loves NBA basketball. And Kaan has found a very specific niche that he can now build upon, and that is talking about basketball in Turkish. And while Kaan was working his day job as an electrical engineer, he discovered this niche, and he started an Instagram page, and the Instagram page began to grow, and it began to grow rather quickly. And since leaving that day job, Kaan has gone on to work at DraftKings and continue to build his audience both on Instagram and through a podcast, talking all about the NBA in Turkish. And this, to me, is a very relatable story of someone who is doing it for themselves. So I am really looking forward to sharing this interview with you today. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Kaan. All right, man. So in that case, you ready to kick it off?
Yep, let's get it.
All right, man. Well, I just want to say thank you and welcome to the Do It For Yourself podcast. When we got connected, you were, I don't know if hesitant is the right word, but you weren't totally sure that your story was going to, fit with the theme that I am going for on the Do It For Yourself podcast. So, um, I want to say that after we got to chatting, like I'm super excited about getting into your story because, and you even said it yourself, I think it's going to be a very relatable story for a lot of the listeners on the podcast because you launched into kind of your own gig, your own thing, and in a very niche market. So we'll definitely get into all that, but just do me a favor, introduce yourself, and let the podcast know kind of 1 to 3 things that you're up to right now and that you're really focused on.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, my name is Kaan Erel. I am born in suburbs of Chicago, so any Chicagoans won't get mad at me for claiming I'm from the city. Skokie represent if there's any listeners from there. Right now, I live in Boston. I am working at DraftKings as a data analyst, and my side hustle is watching and talking about the NBA, creating NBA content, you know, Photoshop, making videos, YouTube, podcast, Instagram, just doing it in English and in Turkish. Um, and yeah, I'm all about the NBA, huge Bulls fan. And yeah, I do a lot of other things too. I've kind of dabbled in a lot of different skills and trying to develop the ones that are most relevant for what makes me happy right now. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, but I'm sure we're gonna get more into it.
For
And
sure.
thanks for
Yeah.
having me on, by the way. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's my pleasure. I'm like I said, I'm really excited to get into your story and share it with the listeners. Just from the aspect of it being such a relatable story, and still a story of how you're doing it for yourself. But you mentioned there that you're doing a podcast and Instagram and everything surrounding the NBA. You're doing it in English, but you're also doing it in Turkish. So, just right off the bat, where does that come from? Why did you select Turkish?
Well, it wasn't random. I already knew how to speak Turkish because of my immigrant parents. I'm first generation born here. My dad moved to um, Chicago back in like '85 when the Bears won the Super Bowl. It was like 2 weeks after he landed, and he did not know what was going on. So yeah, I learned Turkish. Turkish was actually my first language in terms of like what I learned at home when I was 2, 3 years old. But English is obviously what I'm better at. Although I am fluent and conversation, I'm pretty fluent in Turkish. They say I have a slight accent, but it's way better than most people. And then why I decided to get into the NBA. One, I know the NBA is well, NBA in Turkish as well. It's kind of growing there. Basketball is definitely a growing sport. Two out of the final four teams in EuroLeague, which is like the main European basketball league, two out of the final four were Turkish. So it's a growing sport there. The sports media culture that exists here is not as developed as it is in Turkey. Neither is Facebook advertising costs, which I mean, I met you through D Rock's post, and we got to D Rock's post because we follow Gary Vee, and all Gary Vee preaches is Facebook, Instagram ads, and how they're underpriced. Well, they might be underpriced in the US, but I've tried it both, and they're a lot more underpriced in Turkey. So I was just like, well, I know Turkish, I know the NBA, and there's a demand for it in Turkey right now, and the NBA media culture here is just super saturated. Not that I don't think
Mhm.
I'm going to make it to the
Yeah.
top there. I fully do. That's just a longer game. And I want to leverage the underpriced attention, as Gary Vee would love to say. Um, that's in Turkey, and then the audience that's kind of hungry for a lot of NBA content there to leverage that, and then get into whatever I can get into, maybe try to get media credentials as covering it for Turkey. And then once I'm in the games as media, that gives me, again, leverage to grow my English podcast, which is also something I'm really passionate about. But yeah, Turkish, it's just what I was fluent in and the opportunity that it kind of presented itself.
Well, and one of the other things that Gary always says is, you know, watch what I'm doing.
Oh,
Don't don't
100%.
don't listen to what I mean, he wants you to listen to what he's saying because he's giving great advice, but the other thing that he wants you to do is actually watch what he's doing. Watch what he's doing on Instagram and what strategies he's using on Instagram, and watch what strategies he's using on Facebook, especially when it comes to ads and posting content and everything else. And I haven't actually consumed too much of Gary's content recently because I've been focused on my own podcast. So I took another piece of his advice, which is stop watching me and go do your own thing. So I have adopted that one. But one of the things that I noticed just before I stopped really consuming his content was he was also translating his content, his books, his speeches, and a lot of his stuff into other languages. So is that where you got that idea? Did you adopt that idea from watching what Gary was doing and not necessarily listening to what he was telling you to do?
Not really. I kind of already have been thinking about doing or switching into Turkish for a while now. Not before I started listening to Gary Vee. I've been kind of consuming his content for a while. Um like a year and a half now. But the Turkish stuff is just like it's just came natural to me. I knew that I was good at, or I mean, I'm confident that I'm good at what I'm doing, and in that sense, and I probably wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think that. So, and I figured that the demand is definitely less in Turkey, or the supply is definitely less in Turkey. Um, and another thing, what really got me into the idea is there is this guy Acun Ilıcalı is how you pronounce it in Turkish. He's one of the richest guys in Turkey, and all he does is take American reality TV shows and make the Turkish version of them. And he's done like Deal or No Deal, Survivor, The Voice, um, a couple other things that I'm forgetting right now. And he is making bank, and his ideas aren't original. I mean, he's a
Right.
smart guy. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but I kind of took that and was like, well, podcasting is 100 million. I don't even know if it's at billions yet, but it's a huge industry in the U.S. And
Yeah.
it's like if you go to Turkey, 9 out of 10 people won't even know what a podcast is. Um, and it's just like among the college kids, and not even all college kids, like the more higher end schools and liberal, like the Harvards of Turkey kind of know what podcasts are, you know. And for me, I was just like, well, it makes way too much sense for commuters in Istanbul who on average are commuting at least 40 minutes to an hour, just from personal experience being there every summer growing up. We might get into that, but um, I was like, podcasting is going to blow up in Turkey. And there's already a couple podcasts, but not really a lot. And I figured might as well start mine. It's not going to be a lot of listeners at first just because people don't know what it is, but
Mhm.
it's already up to my English podcast numbers. And my Instagram has blown up fairly quickly. My YouTube is growing. I started this like in late January. So approaching 5-ish months now, 4.5 months. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm up to like 11K followers on Instagram and 500 subscribers on YouTube. And these are things that I've never really done before or experienced before, in terms of the scale and people reaching out to me and DMs every day, and just like young kids and older basketball fans alike, just kind of forming this community. And it's all the idea. I'm kind of rambling, but the idea came from that one guy who takes American market blowups and does it in Turkey, which is 4 to 5 years back on basically any trend, social trend generally.
So I want to kind of track it back a little bit here and go back to your story of one, how you became interested in the NBA, and then talk about your decision to go to college, because you did go through college and you graduated college with your degree in electrical engineering,
Yes.
which is, you mentioned you're working at DraftKings and you're doing something completely different now. So let's start with how you got interested in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, shout out Derrick Rose, MVP Derrick Rose. I was again raised in suburbs of Chicago, so Chicago sports was all around me. 2010 and 2011, the year before his MVP year, is kind of when I started watching a couple of games here and there. But his MVP year, really, I started watching every Bulls game. And that year they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. That kind of coupled with my dad's friend having season tickets, but also being out of the country. So I got to go to like 10 different Bulls games during the season and one game each of the playoff rounds. I was at Miami versus Bulls, um, game 5 for any basketball fans out there. And that was like a wild series. super fun time. That was like LeBron and Wade's first year and all that madness, and Derrick Rose's MVP year, and it just kind of really vaulted me into just super basketball fan category. And I would play basketball with my friends as well, and it really started out just as Bulls fandom, and slowly but surely just the NBA culture overall is amazing, and that's one of my goals too, is to bring that to Turkey. But that's kind of how I started my NBA fandom. I was like huge into soccer. I was a big soccer guy, obsessed with soccer when I up until I was like junior year. I think 2010 was junior year in high school, sophomore junior year in high school. And I shifted all my attention from soccer to basketball basically, and now I barely know who's on what team in soccer, and I used to be able to list that from memory back in the day. Uh, but that's kind of how things go. It's whatever you're into at the moment kind of takes over, and it's whatever it is you at the moment. But yeah, that's how I got into basketball. Um, and
What,
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, what caused that shift though? Like, you were super into soccer and you got into basketball. What was it, just the fact that the Bulls were doing well? And so you're like, "Wow, this is pretty cool." Like, the Bulls are doing really well. Or was it the sport itself that was really interesting, like, that was really interesting to you? What really pulled you away from soccer and over to basketball?
I think it's a combination of things. One very specific thing that that happened was Fenerbahce is the Turkish team that I'm a big fan of, the soccer team that I was a fan of, and they got into this huge like European scandal or match fixing scandal, and they got banned from European leagues for 2 years, and they like they their roster kind of got blown up, and um, it was just kind of like that kind of took me away from soccer. And also soccer was always like a me and my dad thing. Not that I didn't love soccer, but it was always like on the weekends we would watch it with my dad and stuff. And then I went to college, and playing basketball, pickup basketball is a lot easier, like at the gym or whatever. And I started playing
Mhm.
pickup basketball a lot more too, just with my friends in high school before going to college. And then in college, I was never at home, so there was not a lot of other people following the Turkish league soccer with me, right? And I was never like all in on the Champions League. Like I would definitely watch it, but I'm not like some of those people who would watch Premier League and Spanish League and
Mhm.
like all around soccer. I was more like hyper focused on Turkish League and Champions League games, right? So and then just Derrick Rose kind of happened, and Chicago Bulls kind of blew up, and I always kind of liked going to the games, but that year I went to a bunch of games, and that really, and then the coverage of the game, the culture around the game is a lot more relatable than the culture around Turkish soccer, for example. I also am really into rap music, and my friends in college were really into um, basketball, and it's just kind of a whole bunch of things came together that made me focus on basketball a lot more than soccer for a little bit, and it just kind of kept going. Plus, the Turkish soccer culture is a little bit like, I don't know. There's a lot of like complaining to the refs. Not that there isn't in American sports, but it's like more there. Flopping is more just prevalent there, and that's just stuff I'm not huge into. I was never a flopping guy when I was playing soccer.
Okay.
I've even had a ref tell me like, "Hey, if you fell down, that would have been a penalty or whatever." I'm like, "Well, it should have been a penalty anyway, and you should have probably called it."
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know why the shift happened, but it kind of did, and right now I'm happy it did. But who knows? Maybe down the line, like hopefully I end up doing basketball and covering the NBA and stuff full time, and I get to have more time to watch soccer and talk about soccer because I still really like it, and I still think I know a lot about the sport and would like to discuss it with people. It's priorities right now. I don't really have the time to follow soccer as well as everything else I'm doing.
And I bet that even though you said it was easier for you to find people to play pickup basketball with, I would have to assume that it was easier for you to find people to play pickup basketball with because that's where your interests were. Like, if
Yeah,
you were really super interested in soccer still while you went to college, you would have probably put in the effort to seek out people to play soccer with. You know what I mean?
definitely. It's
Um,
all about your
but
priorities and how you align them, really.
yeah, and so your priority was basketball and you really loved basketball, so you were seeking out people to play basketball with, because I can I can almost gather just, a couple minutes into our conversation that, like, when you're passionate about something, you're gonna go all in on what you're passionate about.
Yep.
So there's no discount to that. I think it's just a matter of your interest shifted, which we're gonna see that happen again. Um, and you shifted over and your interest was then in basketball as opposed to soccer. So kind of playing off of that and talking about your interest shifting, you went to school to be an electrical engineer.
Yes.
So when you went to school, obviously being a first generation of immigrant parents, was there a big emphasis placed on going to college? And are you the oldest? And do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I'm the oldest. I have two siblings, but really only one sibling growing up. And then when I was like 15, I had another brother who's also awesome, but like he was never in like the picture growing up. More
Mhm.
after I went to college, he's became like 2, 3 years old, and but yeah, so oldest child with two siblings.
But even as the oldest child, I'm sure that there was a very large emphasis put on going to college for you, especially
Yeah.
being the oldest of first generation immigrant parents.
Yeah, well, so I guess getting into that a little bit, I was always a great student. And I was always a great student without really trying more than I felt I needed to. I never put in extra work per se to get good grades. I always did enough to get like A's basically, except for English, which I was getting B's in, but that's not a problem. And I just like my dad is very, he built his own business when he came here, and he has his own maintenance company, and he's wanted like a definition of the American dream, right? He came here because he was dirt poor in Turkey, and flew out here because he thought that was the only option to make money and take care of his family, and built his business, and still runs that business, and yada yada. Well, not yada yada. It's like a big part of how I am who I am right now. But it was never really a question that I would go to college. Like there was not like
Mhm.
pressure or anything. It was just kind of like given, right? Like it was not only given to him, but a given to me and a given to my mom. And it was just kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna go to college because that's what you do. My mindset now, maybe it would be a little different, and I might do a
Mhm.
little different things. But
For
then
sure.
again, if I had my mindset while I was at college, I would also act a little differently because I had a shit ton of. Sorry, do we can we curse on here? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
because I had a shit ton of time, and I did a lot of nothing with it. And I wouldn't do that again if I had the chance. And yeah, so going to college was never felt like it was forced upon me. It just kind of was the route to go, right? And then electrical engineering, I only chose because I was like, you know what, I like math and physics, and I'm good at that stuff. And electrical engineering, like technology, right? The world is always going to improve in technology, so electrical
Mhm.
engin- engineering made more sense. And my dad, I mean, if it were up to my mom and my dad, I'd be a doctor, but they were never like really pushy. But also, if I was just like, I'm going to go to college for communications, I don't think they would have felt like they would have been okay with that. But it was kind of, I guess it was lucky for both of us, that I was good at math and science and I enjoyed it. And I knew that I kind of quote unquote had to go to college, and they also felt the same way, and I was able to get into college. I was lucky that my dad makes enough money to pay for it all, so I'm not in that boat of college debt that a lot of people are, so I'm really
Yeah,
grateful.
that's
Yeah, I'm
huge.
really
That's
grateful for
huge.
that. Um, but it's like I said, if I had to do it over, I don't know if I would skip college altogether. While that's not fully out of the picture, if I had to do it over, I just would take a different course of action in how I went about things.
And being as your dad owns this business, was there any conversation or any thought in your head of going to school for something to ultimately one day take over this business when your dad wanted to step away?
Yeah, that was always a priority for me not to do. I never wanted to
Hmm.
take over my dad's business because I just knew that he wasn't happy doing it generally. Like he was never like um excited to go to work, and I worked with him every summer too, so like I knew what kind of the work was, and it just was not interesting to me. I was also very in the mindset of let me just do enough to be comfortable when I'm not working, a mindset that I've gotten rid of in the past couple years. But like for me, ideally, I would just sit at a desk all day, just work on my computer and then go home and chill and do nothing and play 2K and whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind
Make enough money to just be comfortable, make enough money so that your bills are handled, you could potentially take care of a family one day,
100%,
but
yeah, just electrical
not.
engineering salary, go the steps and everything was gonna be fine. There was a very specific week that changed that, but I'm sure we'll get into that too. But yeah, that's kind of what the plan was, and seeing what my dad did, working so many hours and in something that he didn't really like, and it's like I didn't really like the stuff there either. I mean, he does like maintenance work, like he runs the company, so he's not doing the actual labor, but I would do the actual labor, like keep the grass green in condominium complexes, and
Mhm.
clean the windows and vacuum the hallways, and take out the trash bins and water flowers, and just a lot of that type of stuff. And like what taking over means is doing the business side of it, which I guess right now it would be kind of interesting to take over the business side of the business of his company. But it just never seemed like something I wanted to do, and I made it a point to make sure he knew that I didn't also, because I think he ideally would have wanted me to. Um,
For sure,
yeah,
yeah, for sure. That mindset, though, that you were just talking about, the mindset of doing enough to just get by
yeah,
and, get your paycheck and everything, that goes back to high school. You did what you had to do to get through high school,
100%.
and you didn't study extra, right? You didn't,
Nope.
do any extra credit, you didn't stay after class, you didn't do any of that stuff, so that was kind of a mindset that you had built up for a little while. Where do you think that mindset came from?
Um, I think it probably came from our honestly, like my parents were more like laid back. Like my dad would work a lot, and my mom would, just kind of chill and leave us to do our own stuff with me and my brother. And we would watch TV, play video games, and go on the computer, and just regular kid stuff.
Mhm,
But it was never like, hey, do work or earn your keep or what. Like I don't say my mentality was spoiled, but I definitely got whatever. I didn't want a lot of things, but since I didn't want a lot of things, it was easy for them to give me what I wanted without really any hesitation. And I was generally content with status quo, like,
mhm.
and content with status quo and just chilling at my house with my brother, and I don't know where it came from really. I guess I was just comfortable and didn't have to do anything. So I didn't, and it was just, oh, I want to play video games now, or oh, I want to watch TV now, or just do regular kid things. But I was always curious about stuff. So I'm like really into like talent, just overall talent at anything. I am super into. So I would always be drawn to videos of singers or people creating stuff, or I said I'm good at math and science, so any like cool patterns or puzzles and stuff like that type of stuff that I would get into. But it was never like hustle and do a lot of work, and I wasn't 6-year-old shoveling snow to make money while all my friends were playing outdoors. I probably wouldn't even go.
Lemonade stands and
You
like
know,
all that
yeah,
stuff.
that wasn't me, but I probably wouldn't even go
Yeah.
outdoors. I was more content just indoors, in my room, chilling. It's I don't know where it came from. That's a great question. That I generally am. I'm into psychology and just like why people do things. I guess I've never psychoanalyzed my childhood, which is interesting. But yeah, it's interesting.
So you get to this point where all of a sudden you're not okay with status quo,
Yes.
right? And you're you graduate from college with a degree in electrical engineering, and you get your first job coming right out of college, which is fantastic, right? I mean, that's amazing to have a job coming right out of college, and you get this job, and it's not going exactly as planned, or maybe it is going exactly as planned, but something's going off in your head, and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't for me, and I'm not digging this anymore, and this status quo thing is not, it's not how I want to live at all. So let's get into that week that you were just talking about, and kind of tell me a little bit about your first job and where this mentality shift came in.
Yeah, so I was in Chicago working at a company called Sargent and Lundy. Shouts out to everyone there. Um, they do like power distributions, power systems, and substation design, and just a lot of old timey engineering stuff. That I mean, not old timey as in what they're doing right now is old timey. It's the industry is really old, and substations are really old, and you can find. And we were working sometimes with drawings from like the 1920s that we had to update, and it's just being a huge company like that, working on an old industry with, yeah, there's innovation, but it's not like constant innovation. It's just kind of like, hey, do this and this and this, which has been done for this amount of years until something that we can't not do. That type of innovation and technology that comes around that changes what you do. Um, until that happens, it's pretty status quo at the job itself. And I had a lot of friends there, so my time in the Chicago office working in this industry wasn't that bad. I didn't like the work, but I liked the people around me. So it was fine. And like that year, I was still fine with the status quo. But that's really that year I really started getting into podcasts and NBA podcasts specifically. Any basketball fans or podcast fans would know Nate Duncan's Dunked On podcast. He had an episode with a guy called Larry Kuhn. What's up, Larry? Probably not listening to this, but he does a lot of like CBA work, for the NBA. Um, and he organizes this week long conference called Sports Business Classroom, in Las Vegas during summer league, and I heard of the opportunity on a podcast, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's literally just going to summer league and learning and getting lectures from the top of the line, top of the business, of all, like from all regards, like GMs of NBA teams, head coaches, um, lead broadcasters on TNT, and creative content directors on at Bleacher Report, and just basically anyone who's anyone revolving around basketball, the industry, not just the sport, but like the whole entertainment industry, including the sport, was people that I was just in contact with for a whole week, hearing their stories, listening to how they became successful, and a lot of them like are very similar to what I'm saying here. And I don't know too much about your background, but what you're saying, or what you do, and a lot of people who reach success started out as people who kind of were just chilling with the status quo, or like doing whatever job. And I a couple stick out to me. Like one girl was a chemical engineer out of college, very relatable to me. And then now she's like head of creative content for Bleacher Report, and like working with Game of Zones and stuff, and just really cool things. And then Neil O'Shea, who's the GM of the Portland Trailblazers, he was like an actor until he was 27 ish, right? And now he's the GM of a basketball team. And all these stories was kind of like, wow, if I do something that I love for 20, 30 years, I highly doubt that there's going to be a lot of people better than me at it. And I just have like that confidence in me as well, especially about things that I love doing. One, because I generally don't love to do something if I'm not already good at it. Um, or if I don't think I can become good at it. And yeah, so that's where like the patience and the long term outlook that Gary always preaches. I actually got that from this week. And for me, that's when I really just kicked my life into overdrive a little bit. Um, I started keeping NBA salary cap sheets for every single team. I started a podcast. I learned how to make a podcast and learned how to build a website and um, organize like 10 to 15 people from like people that took the week long course or thing with me. We all kind of got together and started doing the podcast. And I kind of try to organize it a little bit. And we got up to like a podcast a day, which was kind of crazy. Then
That's yeah,
that
that's insane.
then
That's a
yeah,
lot.
yeah, then I started learning like Python and coding and stuff because I was like, I love data analytics and data analysis is big in the MBA as well. And a couple projects stuck out to me during the Vegas week too. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to learn how to do this as well. Then when I started learning how to do Python and stuff, I um, was like, I can do this as a job. And that also ties into me hating my job in Boston. I had moved to Boston in that time span, and a lot of things were happening. Also moved in with my now wife. And yeah, so I'm kind of all over the place right now. So I'm gonna toss it back to you to get us back on track here. But that week is kind of when everything shifted in me, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna start doing what I love doing, but productively, and every day, and at every given moment that I have free time, and I'm still doing that. And slowly but surely, I'm getting to a point where I think I know where I want to go in the middle long term ish, 5 to 10 years. I hesitate
Mhm.
to call anything more than like 20 to 30 years long term anymore.
Right, right, right.
But like within that 5 to 10 year span, I think I know where I want to be going. And that definition has changed a couple times, but I think I'm more firm in my belief of where I want to go right now. But that could also change like tomorrow. I honestly don't know. I just know that I love that it's a new thing every day and things are keep changing. Before, the status quo meant that your life was kind of at a status quo as well. And that's really not been the case since I went to that week long summer league course.
So this week-long summer league course, this was not necessarily centered around media and people doing things in the media for the NBA. Like, was this just all encompassing of the NBA, or like what exactly was going on at this conference?
Yeah, so sports business classroom. It's basically how they market it and stuff is it's a week long immersion in the basketball industry. So uh,
It's
it's
everything then.
basically everything. It's more geared
Okay.
towards like, do you want to break into sports? Is like the main like slogan, right? Um, and I was like, yes, I would love to work at sports. Like, I would love to do anything with regards to the NBA. But I was also like, I want to be a scout, or I want my eventual goal to be a GM of an
Uh-huh.
NBA team. And whatever I need to do to get there is what I'm going to start doing. But I also learned like the media stuff. But I was more into like the salary cap, and like I would keep my own cap sheets and stuff. And I figured that would be the best way to interact with front office people. Maybe now, like if I went again today, I would probably go the media route a little bit. Um, but that's not because I'm more into media than I am in basketball. I just think that that's the route, the the faster route, and right now more entertaining route to get to autonomy with what I want to be doing. I know faster is like not really the best word, but it's just like, do I want to be there's a lot of different factors, right? I also have a wife and a fiance, and that like likes to go around and hang out and do stuff. And if I was alone,
Right.
maybe I would take a random internship at a basketball team if that was an opportunity that pays very little and work a lot of hours because that's kind of how it is in the industry. Or maybe I would be like an assistant coach or like a GA or general assistant at um, at a college team or something, that doesn't pay as well, isn't as, you know, bright lights and whatever, and you're just kind of grinding. And that's something that I'm okay with personally, but I'm also, sharing my life with someone else too. So it's.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you don't sometimes you don't I'm sure that your wife would support you in anything that you would do, up until a certain extent. Like, sometimes when
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
making
That last bit is
once
very
you're
important.
married. Yeah, like, once you're married or, even if you're in a very serious relationship, they're gonna support you no matter what you do, but there definitely is some decision making that needs to happen,
Yeah, they don't want you like to leave for a
together.
year and make very minimal money with no really guarantee that you would want to come back if that's like what you're pursuing. And if all their thing is in Boston and in the city, that's kind of like what I was dealing with is like, okay, if this is my goal and I want to be able to get into an NBA team, then I'm going to need to take this low paying random internship job that doesn't, that is, sounds awesome to me, but not
Mhm.
for a relationship. And I totally understand. And right now, I kind of prefer this route that I'm on right now. So it kind of all worked out too in the end.
So you get back from your MBA, like, immersion week.
Yes.
Things kind of change a little bit because you realize that, even though you enjoy numbers and you've been keeping the salary cap sheets and everything on your own, you realize that might not be the way that you can go. And so, was podcasting and kind of all this, like, internet media still relatively new at this point? Like, was there a lot of were there different places that you could go to figure out how to start this podcast?
Yeah. I mean,
Or was it
sorry.
super, super new? No, you're fine.
Um, well, for me, it was new in terms of doing it, but this
Right.
was this was 20 summer of 2017 is when I went. So
So you're yeah.
So I'm like 2 years in now. But back then there was like a lot of podcasts, right? I was definitely not the first basketball podcast by any means. I
Right.
am the first, and still sounds like I'm the only podcast doing like mock trade deadlines weekly during the season. So that's kind of a niche thing that I like to kind of spread around, and that's why I think I still have potential in the American market as well. I think we do a great job at that, personally. It's just about getting word out, but that'll come. But yeah, I just back then I would tell you that like, oh, I want to be an NBA GM or I want a director of basketball, like, but I really didn't know what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. I just knew that what I was doing at that moment would not get me even close to that, even close to somewhere where like I'm okay with what I would be doing. So I was just kind of, as Gary would like to say, tasting, right? I would like doing
Yeah.
finance, learning basketball analytics, like podcasting, uh, learning how to, coordinate a lot of people organizing podcasts and recording podcasts and editing them and teaching people how to record and edit them and posting them to the website and networking with podcast networks and all while hating my new job in Boston because I moved to Boston because my then girlfriend got into school there, and I went to a new job in the same industry that I hated. But that place, like, I didn't really get along with the people there either as much. So, and the job was bad, and it wasn't in the city; it was in like a suburb, and it was just like bad. It was bad. And that really, like, I almost quit on the spot like 3 4 times. Like I got up to walk to my manager's office to quit on the spot and then walk past the door because I like got scared or cold feet or whatever it was, and went to the bathroom. But that like kind of experience led to me, getting into a data science course and learning analytics and Python and coding, and that's how I got my job at DraftKings. So that was kind of all
Wow.
going on at the same time as me doing this podcast and learning how to do the podcast and cap sheets and basketball analytics projects. And like I'm a hot mess right now because I was a hot mess back then too. Like,
Right, right, right.
like when we get into kind of currently what I'm doing, I'm a lot more organized in my thought process, and I can tell you what I'm going to do now, then, and later. But back then, I was a hot mess, and it was a hot mess. But I'm glad it was a hot mess because it needed to be for me to understand where I wanted to go.
Well, and I think, you know, just so that you know, Khan, like there's a lot of people who may be listening to this podcast that are currently in that situation.
Hit me
Like
up.
they they are a hot mess and they don't know what they want to do. They have no idea what they want to do. They don't know if, they want to get into triathlon or they want to get into this over here, or they know that they need to lose weight, but they haven't. They are that version of you who is getting up to go to your boss's office to quit on the spot, not even put in your 2 weeks, quit on the spot. They know that that is what needs to be done, but they haven't done it yet. Like they've walked past their boss's door, not literally, but
Yeah.
figuratively, whatever the situation may be, right? They've done that hundreds of times, quite possibly. So when do you finally work up the courage to walk into your boss's door, not past that door? And did you quit on the spot or did you put in your 2 weeks?
So this is how this happened. This was a conversation that I had with my fiance and my or then fiance and my parents and brother and like calling all my close friends. Um, and just talking it out. I was like, I just want to quit. Like, I think I can recoup. Uh, Are we back? Okay.
Yes.
Did you lose that last sentence?
I I lost you where you said you were having the conversation
I'll just
with
restart this
your
thought.
wife and your
Yeah, I'll just
fiance.
restart the thought so you can cut it at the
Mhm.
question. Um,
Yep.
yeah, so that was like a whole process. Actually, I didn't like it didn't just dawn on me that I'm gonna quit. Obviously, that's why I went like 3, 4 times to the door. But it was a conversation with my then fiance, my parents, all my close friends. Like I would be talking to a lot of people, and I was like, I just want to quit. Like don't I think that going there, wasting 10 hours of my day at least, because hour like 40, 45 minute to an hour long commute, both ways, and 8 hours of work at least. Um, I just want to quit. It's a waste of time, complete waste of time. And I think if I put in those hours, those 10 hours a day extra that I would get, I can get another job that is more relevant and that I at least like a little bit more. Like anything is better than this type of mentality. So
Mhm.
that my dad was like, why don't you just ask to go part time? Or and like you have instead of being fully incomeless, you'll have half the income and still be able to survive. Like electrical engineering salary isn't bad for those of you that study in that major. And I can get by a lot more comfortably on half an income. And I definitely would have gotten like I had calculated everything. I was good like for 6 to 7 months with zero income based on how much I've
Mhm.
saved, and I lived with my parents for the first year, and I don't spend a lot of money and yada yada. So I was like, I'm good for like 6, 7 months without, but I could go a long time part time. Um, so anyway, that
That's a really good idea by your dad, by the
yeah,
way.
no,
Like that's
yeah,
That's a really and I would I mean, that's the dad
yeah,
mentality, right?
yeah.
Like, and it seems like your parents, like like you were saying earlier, your parents never really pressured you into anything, right? But I think there was definitely a point where they would also try and, talk some sense into you, which is what parents are supposed to do. So, if if you were like, "Oh, hey," just like you said earlier, "Oh, hey, I wanna go to school for communications." They'd be like, "Well, Khan,
Yeah.
about that." But in the same breath, you're like, "I wanna quit my job right now," and your dad's like, "Well, why don't we go
Yeah,
part-time?"
exactly.
It seems like they're definitely the voice of reason. So, you go to your boss, and do you propose this idea, and how does your boss
So I
respond?
was super out and honest with everything with my boss. I was like, look, this is not the thing I want to do. And I'm a lot more confident now, but back then my voice was shaking and like my eyes were like starting to like water and super nervous and just like I was a mess. But what I said was, I was like, I don't see myself doing this in the next 3, 5 years, year, hell, even 6 months. Like, I don't really want to be doing this in this field. I am currently enrolled in a data science course to get to transition jobs. I felt I had three options, and these are the options. And this is almost verbatim to my boss. I could either do what I'm doing right now, come over, ask to go part time, and kind of work on the projects that I'm on right now for the time being. And when I find a job in, 3 to 4 months is the timeline that I thought it would happen in. Um, then I'll start get transition onto the new job, or I can not tell you right now, and just leave on the spot in 6-ish months, which would have been the time period I thought it would have taken if I stayed full time. Um, or option number three is I tell you and you fire me right now. um, and they were they were okay with me going part time, and staying there until I was able to get a new job. It only took me like a month and a half to 2 months to find a new job, which was like 30 to 40K less than what I was making. But it was in like a tech field and in a growing startup that had like a lot more potential. That wasn't DraftKings, by the way. Um,
I was gonna say, wait a minute.
yeah, it wasn't DraftKings.
Wait a minute. I mean, I know DraftKings is kind of a startup, but at the same time, DraftKings is probably doing pretty well right
Yeah,
now.
that's a different
So, oh,
yeah, that's a
okay.
different thing. So that's kind of the conversation that I had with my boss. But it took a lot of nerve to kind of go. I was very nervous, at least, to have that conversation. I was fully ready to, lose my job that day, but also I was kind of like low key hoping for it. I kind of wanted them to fire me. But it's tougher for them to fire me. Plus, you know, I don't know. Part time was fine, but it ended up not really even. It was more 3/4 time than halftime, like I wanted, which is like I was pretty depressed around that time. To be honest, like I was not happy waking up. I was not happy coming back home because I needed to go back to that job and all that stuff. Like it wasn't a great time for me, but it was fine. Like I'm out of it now and doing really well. And yeah, the drafting stuff, the interviews just kind of started at the same time. But the one company got back to me with an offer in like a week, and DraftKings took like
Mhm.
4 to 6 weeks. Um,
Wow.
and I just had my initial phone screen scheduled when the offer from the other place came. So I couldn't risk it, and I really needed to get out of the other job, just for mentally. Uh, and it worked out that I got the DraftKings job, and I left the other one six weeks in, which wasn't the best, but um, shit happens.
Now, did you see an immediate mental shift when you started this new job, even though you were taking a significant pay cut? Were you almost immediately happier and relieved
Oh,
that you did not have to go to that job
when I
anymore?
walked out the door of my other job, I like it literally felt like I would always hear people say, "Oh, it's like a weight lifted off my shoulders," but I had never actually
Uh-huh.
felt it myself. And that's kind of how I felt. Like my eyes were watering up, like out of joy and like out of relief. And it
Wow.
was like just mentally, I was in such a bad place. And when I walked out, um, leaving the job, I was like, oh my god, like I did crazy. I should have quit like months ago. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, so that's kind of it. Wasn't when I started the new job; it was when I left the old one that I immediately was happier.
You did the right thing though. I
100%.
mean,
Yeah.
you did the right thing. You know, you didn't burn any bridges where you were. You went in, you were honest with your boss at the time. And I think that that's that's really big, that's really big, and I think that takes a lot more. I think it takes a lot more to do what you did and do it the right way rather than just up and quit on the spot, or even worse, just never show up,
Yeah,
right?
that could have happened.
I think the just never show up thing is cowardly. I think that that's and obviously, I mean, I'm not a psychologist by any means, nor do I play one on TV, so I can't tell you, what the real psychology is behind that, but I think just personally, my opinion is the no call, no show, never come back, never say anything, never face it. Like, I think that that's cowardly, and I think that plays into something like it's just the same as never facing whatever it is that's going on,
Yeah.
right? So if you didn't go in and talk to your boss and have this conversation, you wouldn't be facing what was going on in your life at that point, right? You wouldn't have faced this problem that was right in front of you. You would have taken the easy way out and you would have just not gone. And I don't necessarily know if you would have had the same outcome because it was it was the easy route. So instead of putting yourself through this challenge, which you did, you may have just, taken the easy route and been like, whatever, I'm not going to do that anymore. But we grow and change through challenge. So I think that's something really important that needs to be noted about this point in your life.
Yes, sir. I mean, I don't know if it would have been easy to just stop going, because I think the like, because that would have left, like, just mentally, I don't know if it would have felt like I was leaving. It would have felt
Hmm.
more that I was, like, um just unfinished. Like, I don't know, that's not kind of me, I guess. I would have never
Right.
just not shown up again. Just because then I would have been thinking about, like, okay, the consequences. Not that there would have been a lot of consequences. Probably I would have just lost my job. But I also, like, knew the
Which
people.
you wanted to
Yeah,
do
I
anyway.
knew the people there, and, like, I mean, not everyone there likes their job either, and they're kind of in the same situation that, but they're not really into, like, in at the same spot in their lives, or they don't have the same ability to leave like I did. And not that they can't, it's just some people don't have that mentality, or some people have a family to feed and they're older in their career. And there's just a lot of different circumstances for everyone. um so I just didn't, I just didn't want to leave without doing anything, without saying anything. I would have at least quit, right? Because I know there was a
Mhm.
couple projects that were bad. Like, oh, well, I don't need to talk about that. But yeah, I thought there wasn't really another choice besides just outright quitting.
Now, when you were starting your podcast and even before you started your podcast, were you a podcaster, like, listener? Did you consume podcasts at all aside from, like, Gary's content? But, like, did you consume any other NBA podcasts?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I would, back when I worked in Chicago. That's kind of what I was saying. Like, that summer of that, or no, the summer before I went to that basketball thing, I in
Mhm.
Chicago, I would listen to. That's when I really got into basketball podcasts, and I would listen to a lot of basketball, like, consume a lot of basketball podcasts. I actually got into Gary's content at the Boston job, and that kind of pushed me even further, right? Like, Gary was a big influence in me pulling the trigger, and I guarantee you, at least a couple times when I walked up to my manager's door and didn't knock, I was in the middle of a Gary V podcast,
Mhm.
which I love. I mean, Gary's obviously has changed a lot of lives, and uh, definitely is helping out mine as well. So shouts out to him.
So yeah, hopefully he's listening.
He does not
No,
consume content, bro.
no, no. But so I'm assuming that when you were listening to these basketball podcasts and you were kind of, around the sport so often, you had heard of DraftKings. Um, Initially, how did you learn of this job? And when you went to apply for the job, was it something that you really thought there was a possibility of, or was it an absolute long shot and you're like, I'm just going to apply for this? and see
For
where it goes.
DraftKings?
Yeah.
Well, during this data science course, online course that I was in, I would be going to meetups and stuff. Like they had a career development curriculum as well, and it's called Springboard for anyone listening that's interested. Um, but you can do a lot of that stuff on your own too. So I probably wouldn't spend the money again. I would learn it on my own. But regardless, going to meetups and meeting people and talking to them, and like I'm talking to you, like when you ramble on about something and that you're passionate about, you
Mhm.
sound impressive sometimes. Like people a lot of the time are either impressed with the amount of work that I put in or are kind of taken aback by the amount of work that I put in, and don't understand why you would do that. Like I've encountered both situations. But when you go to like data analytics meetups or data science meetups, like it's a lot of people trying to make their own career transition or do their own stuff. So it's a lot of like-minded people in that sense. And I met this guy that I talked to. He was like a startup founder, and I told him about what I was doing. We kind of chatted and hit it off. Then he said, "Oh, I have," and then I told him like, "Oh, I would love to work at DraftKings." And he had a friend that worked at DraftKings, and he introduced me to that friend. That friend I talked to, he was also kind of all about the stuff I was saying. He put my resume into the referral system, and that's how I kind of got it. So it was definitely me looking for it and making it happen. Um, but it was also like the company that I wanted to go to when I was trying to make my career transition. Like I would have been okay with any other data analytics job because
Mhm.
I just wanted to get into the field, to eventually like use the same skill set that I could use to do like a basketball analytics job eventually back when I was still on that kind of mindset. Um, and but it worked out. I ended up getting the job that I actually wanted, which is awesome.
So you in order to get this job, you went the extra mile. Like you were networking, you were in this springboarding program, you were doing extra.
Oh, yeah,
Whereas
I was doing a
whereas
bunch of stuff.
in the past you didn't do
No,
extra. You did absolutely 0
yeah,
extra. So where did that mindset shift come from?
yeah. So it was listening to the people at the sports business classroom, the summer league conference. Um, like hearing NBA GMs talking about their 23-year-old selves and me being like, wow, that sounds a lot like me. And I was like, okay, so then let me listen closer. And I listened to exactly what they said they did, and it was all work a lot and do a lot of things, like hustle basically. Like none of them just kind of
Mhm.
cruised to top of their fields, right? No one cruises to the top of their field. They put in a lot of work, and they all loved basketball, and they all put in a lot of work towards the thing that they loved. So I was like, okay, then what do I need to do? I need to put in a lot of work towards the thing that I love. And data analytics is like, I still really like it. I still really enjoy applying it to basketball and sports and just numbers. I that started from my high school thing. Like I like numbers and how and the patterns and identifying stuff. Um, I just like basketball more. But I knew that this was an actual career opportunity that I would like doing for a decent amount of time. Whereas the engineering stuff I knew was zero relevancy to what I wanted to do eventually. So I kind of took like a step by step approach. If you take a step back and look at like I was kind of drawing out my life, like where do I want to go? Like getting a data analytics job at even a company like Staples or like some random data analytics job would have been closer to what I wanted to eventually do than electrical engineering. But I was lucky that I got into DraftKings, which is sports related and data and awesome culture, and I love being there. So that part I kind of lucked out on. But
Mhm.
yeah, the mindset shift started back that summer.
So was when you went to this week-long course and you saw these people who were standing in front of you and they were speaking, was this the first time that you heard, saw, and experienced someone who was at the top of their game who was also enjoying what they were doing? Because you had your dad who was at the top of his game, like, he was doing very well, but he didn't enjoy what he was doing. Like, you could see it every day that he didn't enjoy it. So when you went to this NBA camp, was that the first time that you saw somebody who was at the top, but they were also enjoying it?
That's a really interesting question that I never thought about, and I think the answer is yes. Yeah, I actually never thought about that, so that's really interesting. I don't like trying to recall, but I don't think I have met anyone at that level of success and enjoying it that much, besides like hearing it or seeing it on TV or whatever, which isn't really real, right? I
Right.
mean, to some people it might be real,
It's not
but
it's not right in front of your
exactly.
face though. Like, you're not sitting in front of that person and they're not like, there's always, I'm sure there was probably a moment while you were at this NBA camp where you were sitting in a room and you were listening to someone speak and you felt as though they were literally speaking right to you. Like, if you could have looked around and it would have felt like there was nobody else there. Like, it would have felt like you two were the only two in the room.
100%.
And
Yeah.
that's not something that you can get from watching somebody on TV or YouTube or Facebook or wherever you're watching people. So um I think that definitely made a difference, but I think that there was also, this was probably the first time that you saw somebody who was very successful and
Yeah,
enjoying
no,
it.
that's a great point, man. I never thought about it that way. I mean, I also it also caught me at a very ready time for me to switch my mindset. Like I can always I can kind of
Yeah.
think of like where I was at that time, and like going into it, I was super prepared to like just fully change up my life. Like before even talking to people, before even hearing those lectures. I was like, okay, wow, this is going to be an amazing opportunity. This is exactly what I want to do. This is like blah blah blah. But it kind of surpassed even all those expectations. And seeing it in person and having that effect in person now makes me more capable of getting that advice or like getting that advice from TV or other people. Like just
Mhm.
having random people that I don't need to see in person also have an impact. And that's kind of how Gary Vee kind of took over in terms of tactical skills and mindset skills. Um,
But when you went to the NBA thing, you were also super vulnerable. Like,
Definitely.
you were vulnerable because you really did not like what you were doing. You were going to this conference for something that you did like, you were really passionate about. So, yes, you were open to the idea of changing, but you were also at a very vulnerable point to be able to make that change. And so I think that to tie that to, weight loss, triathlon, whatever the case may be, starting a business, you're not going to make the change until the pain of staying where you are is worse than the pain of the change.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So, like, yes, change sucks and change is hard. And there's things that, growing a business, starting a business, having to start going to the gym when you are significantly overweight, like, those things suck and they're things that are hard to do. Right. And they're things that are painful for some people. But when the pain of your current situation and whatever's going on becomes so unbearable that you're like, well, shit, I'm going to go to the gym. That's when the change happens. And I think that that's exactly what happened for you. You went to this conference because you were very, very fed up with what you had going on in your current situation and you were vulnerable. You were ready to make that change.
Yeah, I mean, that's really wise. If you were Gary Vee and having yourself filmed, you would wink at D-Rock to, clip that,
Clip that
clip that said, what was it? The pain, once the pain you're currently feeling is more than the pain of change, is like, that was super dope, honestly. Like, I like that. I'm going to use that.
for sure, man. Just make sure you
I
tag
will.
me
I
in it.
will.
So I want to start wrapping
Yep.
up because, as I said, I want to be very respectful of your time. You've given me a lot of time and I really appreciate that. So the first thing that I want you to do for me is please tell me where you want people to get connected with you.
Yeah, honestly, um, my basketball stuff is cool and all, but the main thing is Turkish right now. Hit me up at Iconic. That's kind of me. That's where I am. That eventually, hopefully, that blows up too. But at Iconic on Twitter, Instagram DMs is where you should hit me up at Iconic. IKAANIC. That's my name, Kaan, right? So Iconic. And it's the same handle on Twitter and everywhere else. So if you like basketball, the Bench Mob NBA on all social channels, you should check that out too if you're a basketball fan. If not, and you just want to say what's up, hit me up at Iconic.
Awesome. And so the last thing that I'm going to hit you with is I want you to take a little trip back to kind of a spot where we actually just were in the conversation, where you are walking to your boss's office, right? And it's one of the days where you don't knock on the door. You're not ready to go in yet. You're not ready to have this conversation. And put yourself kind of back in those shoes for a minute. Remember how you felt in that situation. Remember some of the things that you were going through. And I want you to think about somebody who could be standing right in front of you, and they are in the same shoes. They're feeling the same exact way. What is one thing that you can say to them to help them knock on the door and have this tough conversation, make this choice, make this change, do whatever it is that they need to do?
Well, that's really interesting. I would one knock on the door, because I think I was even late, even though it all sounded logical how I explained it. I probably should have done it earlier. And if you're already at that point, you don't get to that point of getting out of your seat and going to your manager's office if you haven't already thought about a lot of different things. Like for me, because I've had the thought of, okay, if I quit, I can do this, or I can, flip stuff on eBay, or I can get a bartending job, or I can, at worst, I'll work at McDonald's to make ends meet until I can do something else. At least that's like kind of mindless and you're not like trapped or whatever, right? So, not that I would have worked at McDonald's, but anyway, to the person, whatever you've been thinking about for the past X amount of days, months, years that got you to the point of getting up and going to your manager's office that you're about to knock on, all those things are possible and are a better alternative than walking past that door and sitting down at your desk again. 100%. That's what I would say.
See, and you had a
I
good one
swear,
yourself.
I need my own cameraman, shooting me. I should have been recording this on my camera. What am I doing? I should
Well,
have been, yeah.
I'll definitely I can definitely clip a couple things and send them back
Yeah, I
over
would
to you
love the
for
audio,
sure.
man.
So yeah, absolutely. Well, Khan, I just want to say thank you so much for sitting down and jamming with me for a while here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming on to share your story with the listeners.
Thank you so much, man. This was awesome. Like, I should find more people that want and start my own podcast, the Concast. It's an idea that I've had for a while that I haven't started yet because I do a lot of basketball stuff. But this was awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that is it. That is my interview with Kaan Erel. What did you think about this niche market that Kaan has jumped into and began to explore? I thought that it was very interesting, and it was obviously a market that I didn't know anything about, but I thought it was a very smart and a very bold move on Kaan's part. So I was very interested in Kaan's story, and I am very thankful and very privileged that Kaan came on the podcast to share his story with you here as part of the Do It For Yourself podcast. So thank you for lending me your time and your ears. I do not take your time for granted, and I hope that you enjoyed this interview here on the podcast today. As I said at the top of the interview, if you would like to help me out, help support this show, please do me a favor, take 2 minutes and leave a review. It is something that is going to help this community, this show grow. And it's something that is very, very easy to do, and it costs absolutely nothing except for a couple minutes of your time. So if you would consider doing that, I would greatly appreciate it. I thank you again for coming and hanging out with Kaan and I today, and I look forward to sharing another interview with you next week.